All right, without any further ado, let's get to your topics. Topic number one, how does our Jewish religion view ESP? In some people, this intuition seems stronger. Is that possible? ESP stands for, I think, extrasensory perceptions, or what other people call sixth sense. Do we believe in the sixth sense in the Jewish religion? So we may have spoken about this before, but I do want to answer this question by really focusing on one of the most famous Jewish wishes, and that's the wish of Mazel Tov, right? We wish it at happy occasions. We wish it also when we hear good news. We wish the other person Mazel Tov. What does Mazel Tov mean? It's usually translated as good luck, but Mazel Tov really does not mean good luck. It means good dripping. Mazel comes from the word nozel, which means to drip. So what are we doing? What are we saying? Good dripping. When someone hears good news or experiences good news, we tell them good dripping. What does that mean? So for that, we have to dig further into the mystical and Kabbalistic sources. So we are told by the Kabbalist that when our neshama, when our soul descends to this world, part of the soul remains up in heaven. Not all of the soul descends. So we have a soul that's here below in our body, and we have a soul up there in heaven. That soul, that part of the soul that remains up there in heaven, serves as our GPS, so to speak. And it sends us signals. And that's why sometimes we do have that sixth sense, that ESP, in which we feel like everything intellectually makes sense, but there's still something stopping us from doing whatever it is that we're doing or that we need to do. Or it could be with a business deal. Sometimes everything makes sense on paper, but something, I have the sixth sense, it's telling me not to do it. Or it could be, taking a small decision in life. I want to move to this house, but everything's telling me that it makes sense, but there's something telling me that it doesn't. That extra sensory perception or that sixth sense. Now, that in Kabbalah comes from that GPS soul that remains up there and sends signals and tells the soul, we can see the big picture. You in this world can only see a very narrow part of the picture. We up there can see the pilot view of the picture. And therefore, we're sending you a signal not to do this. Some people may call it intuition. Now, the more a person is in tune with his or her soul, the more they'll be in tune with that GPS, with that part of the soul. In other words, the more a person is synchronized with himself and lives in line with his soul, with what his soul or his divine being wants of him, the more they'll also have a good dripping from that soul, a mazel tov. The less a person follows really what his neshama, his soul wants from him, the more a person is deviated from his true self, the more a person tries to be like his neighbor and tries to live a life that's not him or her, the less flowing or fluid that dripping will be, because he'll be disconnected from his soul. So we now, just to take this a step further, the righteous, for example, those who are considered to be what we call tzaddikim or wholesome, they not only have good dripping, but they have as fluid of a dripping as could be. And that's why we believe that the righteous can see things that we don't see. Why? Because they are so in sync with their soul, including that GPS soul, that they begin to see like that GPS soul. They begin to feel like that GPS soul. They start seeing that pilot view that our soul here below does not necessarily see. So do we believe in ESP as the question was? We believe in good dripping from the soul that remains up there, the GPS soul, to the soul below. And what this teaches us, of course, is that we have to be more in tune with our soul, with our true self. God created only one of you. There's no other person like you in the entire world. And he created you to be you, not to be someone else. And the more you are, the more that sixth sense will manifest itself. And the stronger it will be. Like the question is right here. The less you'll be, the less that GPS soul, so to speak, will manifest itself, because you'll be almost divorced from your soul, or at least far distant from your soul. Now, I'm reminded of the famous story of Rabbi Zusha, whose yahrzeit was just a few days ago. Rabbi Zusha of Napoli, who was one of the great Hasidic masters of 200 years ago. They once found him crying. And I asked him, Zusha, why are you crying? And he said, because when I die and I go up to heaven, God will not ask me, why wasn't I like Abraham? Or why wasn't I like Isaac? Why wasn't I like Moses? God will ask me, why wasn't Zusha like Zusha? And to that, I'll have no answer. So I'm crying. And in a way, this, I think, ESP view of, or Judaism's view on ESP guides us to this recognition that we have to be like we are meant to be, only the real you. And or Zusha has to be like Zusha, and Pinchas has to be like Pinchas, and everyone else has to be like everyone else. And the more we are in tune with that person inside, or that divine being, with that soul inside, the more we'll be in tune with the upper soul, and the more the dripping, the mazel tov will be indeed be good, and will be fluid. So that's just a concise answer to
Rabbi,
to the view of the Jewish religion on ESP.
Right, yeah. Rabbi, how do you know if somebody is a tzaddik?
I think he's, how do I know if someone is a tzaddik? I think his actions manifest it. I think that a tzaddik, first of all, if you have that ESP, if you have that sixth sense, then you sense it in the tzaddik. You immediately see it. And the more a person is a tzaddik, the more his aura is holy. And people can sense that. But secondly, I think a tzaddik is a person who lives his life in the way a tzaddik would live his life. In other words, every minute is accounted for. And every minute is therefore filled with a holy purpose. A tzaddik is someone who does not think of himself, but thinks of what God wants of him.
Rabbi,
the more a person heeds that, the more a person is a tzaddik. Yes, sir.
Well, I chatted the question, but what do you mean you have to be more of yourself? How do we know what our self is?
That's an excellent question. So I'm going to repeat the POP theory that I have. I think that the POP theory stands for 4 words. The first P stands for personality. We have to know what our gifts, what our talents are, what our skills are. God has given each and everyone certain skills and talents, and the more in tune we are with them, the more we have to actualize them. So that's number 1. And then a POPP, the O stands for opportunity. Every one of us has different opportunities every day. That it could include an opportunity that I just had at the gas station to help someone, or to just smile at someone. Or it could include a bigger opportunity, a job opportunity that has just fallen on my desk. And maybe not, but maybe it's an opportunity that is in line with what God wants of me. Then you have the third letter, which is another P, and that's the people that are in our lives. Are there for a reason, either for us to learn from them, or for them to learn from us in subtle ways or in bigger ways. And then the fourth letter is places. The places we are at, also a part of our purpose. The fact that we live here in Arizona means that God wants us to make Arizona, our part of Arizona, our geographical area of Arizona, a holy part. Otherwise, he would have made us live somewhere else. Same when we go on vacation. We might think that we're going to vacation to Hawaii, but really we're going to Hawaii as God's ambassador to make it holy, or to do something special there. So we have to be in tune again all the time with the question of what does God want of us, not just what I want of myself. I think these are 4 indications of how a person can really be in line with his true self. Yes. Yeah, Julie, I see your hand now. Yes.
So the story I told you about my husband driving a couple, seeing the people, the guy and the 2 kids crossing the street, running for the bus, and he drove another 2 miles and then just felt like he had to turn around and help these people. Yeah. Would that be like ESP? He just had this feeling that he should turn around and go help them, and he did ultimately. So
right. So you see, that's listening to your true self. That's beautiful. God planted him right there and then, because God entrusted him and no one else right there and then. So that's really connecting to God. It's a beautiful story. Julie's husband, do you mind if I share it?
No.
Well, how about you share it? You share it. Go for it.
So he was driving, my husband was driving on south on 44th Street. And at Indian school, he saw a guy with a kid in a stroller and running with a kid to catch the bus across the street at Indian school. And he kept driving and he got 2 miles south to McDowell, and he just felt like he needed to turn around and see if they needed help. So he did, he turned around and then he followed the bus and they got off at 28th Street. And he did need help. He was trying to find a party. His phone didn't work. He had to use my husband's phone. And the guy just, ultimately Brad let him call his sister and his girlfriend, and they finally figured out where he needed to go. And after he was walking and following him again a little bit, and he finally found the place.
Yeah.
And it was just, he doesn't know, he just knew he had to turn around and help these people.
See, that's that mazel tov. That's that mazel tov. Beautiful. Thank you, Julie. Linda, I know your hand was up, but you're on mute. Let me ask to unmute. There you go.
No, my hand wasn't up. No,
Linda Benaderet.
Oh.
There you go.
So I find that in my work, when I was working, I had profound intuition that I do not have in my own personal life. That
Right.
there are numerous times where I would do something or examine a patient differently because my gut told me to do so. And, many times I would come up with the correct answer because my gut sent me, I had a woman present with abdominal problems and everybody thought she had colon cancer, and something said to me, check her breast, and she had metastatic breast cancer to the abdomen. And I mean, so many times during my work, my gut directed me to do something that I might have not otherwise done. And it helped me help others. So, bummer that it's not as active, my intuition in my own personal life. But I think that in the work I did, that was God working through me. And I always felt that, but it was a very profound experience for me to have these gut feelings that led me on a little bit different path with a particular patient. And it happened, more than a dozen times. So it was very real.
Right. I believe in that. Judaism believes in that. It's true, especially, when, like you're out there as God's agent of healing in the world, in the medical field. And I think it's true in other fields too, that when we are there to better this world, to partner with God, and God indeed partners with us. And he partners with us by sending us messages through that gut feeling, through that sixth sense, through that intuition. And I'm sure if you speak to other doctors, they feel the same way. I'm sure if you speak to therapists and rabbis and others, they'll tell you the same thing. Yeah.
Well, I think it's learning to listen to and trust your gut feeling, because sometimes it doesn't seem.
Sometimes your ego is too big.
Right. But it usually leads you in the right pathway.
Right. Very well said.
I've learned when you don't trust that you make a mistake.
Can I add something to that? I texted back, the gut is our life force. If we listen to our gut, it's there to protect us and to protect our lives. That's what it's there for. That's why it's in communication with us. The problem is we don't always listen.
Right, exactly. Okay, I want to move on to the other topics. Thank you. So next topic, why are there 613 commandments? What does, if anything, what does the number represent? 613 commandments. And then there's some more questions, but let me relate to that. 613 commandments. Indeed, we know that in the Torah, there are 613 mitzvot, 613 commandments. What does this number represent? So the Talmud states that it represents how the Torah really encompasses our lives completely, permeates every area of our lives. So we have 365 days of the year, right, in the solar calendar. And then you add to that 248 organs in one's body. 365 days of the year plus 248 is 613, to show you that the Torah permeates both this world and our very beings. That's what the Talmud says about this number. There are other significances of this number. The number 613 also is actually alluded in the word Torah. Torah in Hebrew is spelled Taf Vav Resh He, and Torah has a numerical value of 611. Now there's two missing, right? Well, you add the two commandments that were spoken by God. The rest was spoken by Moses, from God to Moses and from Moses to us. But two commandments were spoken from God directly to us. Those were the first two of the 10 commandments. When they were spoken, the Midrash says that each time we heard God's voice, our souls expired. And by the second time, we already told Moses, you know what, you listen to the commandments from God and you tell us what it is, because we don't want our souls to expire anymore. But we heard two of these commandments, again, two of the 10 commandments from God himself. So if you take Torah, which was delivered by Moses, and you add the two commandments that are delivered by God, then you have 611 plus 2, 613. That's another significance of this number. Okay, let's continue on. I mean, there's other significances. For example, Ruth, who's the foremost convert. Ruth, we all know the book of Ruth. Ruth, if you take the numerical value of Ruth, it is 606. And that's because before she converted, she did keep the 7 Noachad laws that all nations should keep. And when she became a convert, she took upon the name Ruth. And Ruth is, again, has a numerical value of 606. So 7 plus 606 is 613. Then she was complete in observance of the Torah. Anyway, we can go on and on with all sorts of other significances. Now, next question, part of the same person's topic. What is similar, if anything, in other religions? I don't know if the question is what is similar regarding the commandments themselves. If anything in other religions, look, we have a lot of commandments that are similar in other religions. I know that, for example, Islam has 5 foundational pillars. One of them is tzedakah. That's how they call it, tzedakah, with an S instead of TZ, but still, tzedakah, which means tzedakah, charity. And there's many others. Even Christianity, of course, has a lot of the commandments that we have, mainly social justice commandments. So we do share a few of the commandments. And again, there's the 7 Noachide laws, which include the belief in one God, the commandments not to murder, not to steal, the commandment also, for example, not to eat a live animal, ever min hachai, what's called. Another commandment. So all these we also have in common. Why did CBT get a new Torah? How many Torahs do temples typically have? That's a good question. So this idea of donating Torahs to synagogues, which is what happened at CBT about a month ago. A Torah was donated by Claude Amiel in loving memory of his parents. This idea really stems from the 613th commandment. 613th commandment is that everyone should write for themselves a Torah. The problem is that, first of all, writing a Torah is very, very expensive. Secondly, there aren't enough scribes in the world to accommodate this need. So some people, those people who can do it, and they write for themselves a Torah, or on behalf of others, or in loving memory of others, a Torah, and that's how they enable others to fulfill this mitzvah. But this mitzvah can also be fulfilled, and I encourage everyone to do so, by purchasing a letter in the Torah. It's as if you wrote one letter, is as if you wrote an entire Torah. By the way, 2 lovely members of our community, Colton Rahav, young members, Colton Rahav and Howard Fraser, I don't know if you saw it in the weekly newsletter, but they just launched just a beautiful project. They realized that Rabbi Steinsaltz's yeshiva does not have a Torah of their own. They have been borrowing a Torah all these years. So they decided to donate a Torah to the yeshiva, and they launched a GoFundMe page, and It was in the newsletter. I'm happy to include the link in the chat if I can find it quickly. And they're enabling every one of us now to purchase even just a letter in that Torah. Like this, it will be as if we fulfilled the 613 commandment. But that's really where the root of this custom comes from. Those people who can afford to, who can somehow donate an entire Torah, do so. How many Torahs do temples typically have? I don't know. Some temples have hundreds of Torahs. I remember, she's in a way very tragic, but I remember visiting Lisbon, Portugal, on a Shabbat years ago. And I was a scholar in residence there, and Lisbon, Portugal today, there are about 1,000 Jews that live there. But when you go to shul on Shabbat, it's maybe 25, 30 Jews. The synagogue is very old. In fact, it's a synagogue that survived the Holocaust and survived other tragedies because it's kind of hidden. If you are walking through that street, you really don't notice a synagogue. You have to go through a building, and behind the building is that beautiful synagogue. It's called Sharei Tikva. But if you go to that synagogue, when they open the Ark on Shabbat to take out a Torah, you'll see that there's about 80 to 100 Torahs. There's more Torahs in the Ark than there are people in the synagogue. And so that synagogue, for example, has a lot of Torahs. The synagogue in Florence, Italy, is also a famous synagogue from 1491, if I'm not mistaken. It also survived the Holocaust because it was used as a storage place for the Red Cross. There's also a little miracle that happened. A Nazi came to break open the Ark, and that axe that he used blew up in his face, so they decided not to touch the Ark. But in that synagogue, you also have hundreds of Torahs. So you really have hundreds of Torahs everywhere in the world. What really should happen, if it was up to me, but I don't think it's possible, mainly because of sentimental or even crazy reasons, is that all these Torah, all these synagogues that have more Torahs than people should be giving their Torahs to the places that don't have a Torah. That would make those Torahs useful. But I guess that that's not happening. But anyhow, so that's regarding the Torah. And topic number 5 here, discuss how the Jewish religion got so diluted and many move away from Judaism or even traditions. It's a good question. How come so many have moved away from Judaism or even tradition? Of course, there are many reasons, and I'm not in the position to quote all of the reasons. For everyone moving away from Judaism, sometimes it's just a different reason. But if there is one common reason, one that I found that myself as a rabbi very often of why people really are never connected to Judaism, is simply because Judaism has always been sold short. It's been diluted to the point that no one would want to connect to a religion like that, understandably so. When people teach you in Hebrew school that God is a man that has a big white beard and he's holding a stick in one hand and a carrot in another hand, why would I want to accept a God like that? That's not Judaism's view on God, but it's taught nonetheless as Judaism's view on God. So I'm not surprised when people reject that view of God altogether and therefore God, because that's what they've been taught, that God is. Well, really, God is not like that. Judaism has been cheapened. Judaism, maybe through the Hebrew school system, which I've lamented for a long time. I wrote a piece about this once, or maybe through other means, or through other movements and other teachers and other people. But it's been diluted to be sold as such a cheap pop culture type of religion that I'm not surprised that so many people reject it. And the way we should be teaching Judaism is by teaching the fullness of it, the richness of it, the full mystical, and yes, even practical side of it. But if we don't teach what true Judaism is, that includes how incredibly relevant every word of the Torah is to our daily lives. Now, the Torah truly has the keys to so much healing, to so much psychological, emotional, spiritual healing, for example, then we'll have more and more Jews be removed from Judaism, because the type of Judaism that they're familiar with is not a type, quite frankly, that I would want to connect with. And therefore, I'm not surprised that that they are removed from Judaism. The Maggid of Mezrich, who was the foremost student of the founder of the Hasidic movement of some 300 years ago, Maggid of Mezrich was once approached by an atheist saying, Rabbi, I don't believe in God. The Maggid of Mezrich responded, don't worry, the God that you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. And in a way, I would say the same thing about many models of Judaism that are presented to people today. The model of Judaism that are presented to you, I also don't believe in. Unfortunately, Judaism has been so diluted, and we think we're doing the next generation a favor when we dilute it. We think we're making it more comfortable. They'll be able to connect to it more. That's not true. It's not true, not in Judaism. It's not true in any other area of life. If I teach, Rabbi Steiner used this example once. If I am teaching basketball to my son, I may say, oh, it's still hard for him to shoot that ball in the basket. The basket is so narrow, and he'll never get it. So you know what I'll do as a good teacher, thinking that I'm a good teacher? I'll just expand the basket. I'll make it much bigger. Oh, now my son can shoot the basketball and get it in. Have I done him a favor? I haven't done him any favors. I've ruined the game of basketball and ruined him in the process. So Judaism has to be taught the way it always has been taught for 3,000 years. It never was compromised, never was diluted. Why all of a sudden are we diluting the message of Judaism? No wonder people are rejecting it. The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. But that's if I had to pinpoint the reason, I really think that that's the reason. Okay. I want to cover more topics, but I know there's more questions here in the chat. I'm sure you have more questions, but let me try to, there's just 2 more questions here, and then we'll open this up. So next topic is as follows. I would like to know more about divine providence. What, where, when, and how. When we don't grow up with that knowingness, how do we integrate it in our lives? How does emunah, faith, enter the picture? Is it synonymous with blind faith? I know we can do our best and let God do the rest, but how do we know when it is time to say that it's in God's hands? It seems that life would go easier if we believe in divine providence. And how does self-determination fit in? Okay, it's a great question. Let me just expound on the concept of divine providence. Divine providence, as you allude to right here, is the knowledge that God guides our every step. The Baal Shem Tov, going back to the founder of the Hasidic movement, would say, even a leaf that was just blown off a tree by the wind is guided by divine providence, and where it will land is God's desire. And apparently the legend is that he once wanted to prove that to his students, that they followed a leaf being blown by the wind, and they saw that it landed somewhere, and they went to uncover the leaf, and they saw that it landed on a worm to keep him warm. So, and he said, you see, even that leaf was guided by God to keep that worm warm. But in any case, the idea again is that everything is guided by God. If we had to word this differently, we would say that God partners with us constantly. He partners with us in our every area of life, in our every aspect of life. God is there with us, guiding our every step. Now, it doesn't mean that we should be robots and we should just be led by God, because God, again, wants to partner. Just like any partnership, every partner has to do his or her job. You can't just allow your partner to do everything, then it's not a partnership. So God wants to partner with us. So he has given us mitzvahs to fulfill. He has given us, like we said, the pop theory, opportunities, people to influence, and places to go to and make holy, and so on. Jobs to do, tasks to fulfill. But at the same time, he tells us, hey, don't worry. Even if you face a challenge going to those places, dealing with those people, or whatever it may be, I will be there with you. And you have to do your best, like you just said, and I will do the rest. Now, what does that mean? How would you, like you just asked, how do you know when it's time to say that it's in God's hands? Once you've exhausted all options, you really have to try your very best to exhaust all options, to exhaust all possibilities. Once you've exhausted all options and possibilities, and you've seen that, okay, you've hit a brick wall, and you know for sure that you've done everything, then I promise you God will do the rest. But you can't give up before you've exhausted all options. And that, I think, is the definition of emunah itself, of faith itself. Faith, again, is not being naive. After I've exhausted all intellectual options and I still don't understand what is happening, then I have to have faith that this is God. But it doesn't take away my active duty to understand things and to do things, more importantly. Once I've tried to do everything and I've done everything, and once I've just tried to understand anything and I've understood everything, then I can allow God to come into the picture. That's really the way we view divine providence, otherwise known also as Hashgacha Pratit, that God is an active partner in our lives, but he's also expecting us to do our side of the partnership. And once we've done everything we could to do our side of the partnership, then God comes in and does the rest. That's really what emunah is. I'm going to add one more layer to this, and then we'll open this up to any other questions. But there's also a slight, if we want to overanalyze this, there's a difference in Jewish text between what is called emunah and what is called bitachon. Emunah is usually translated as belief, and bitachon is usually translated as faith. And there's a difference between the two, belief and faith. Belief is that I understand that God is there, and I believe that he's there and he's somehow acting. Bitachon, faith, is more like trust. I completely trust God, that I don't even have room for doubts anymore. One of the great Hasidic Jews, Rabbi Mendel Futerfas, I think it was, who lived in our generation, would give the following analogy to best describe the difference between emunah and bitachon. I don't know if you're all familiar with tightrope walkers in circuses, right? Those who walk on a tightrope. So, and he would say the difference between emunah and bitachon, or belief and faith, or belief and trust, is that when you see that tightrope walker starting his walk, you have emunah, you have belief that he's going to be successful, because after all, that's his job. He knows what he's doing. You have belief. Bitachon is the next level. Bitachon is when that tightrope walker turns to you and he's about to start walking on the rope, and he tells you, hey, do you want to come on my shoulders? We'll walk together. If you say yes, then you've had bitachon, then you've had true faith, then you've had true trust. That's the difference. And sometimes it's true with God. Sometimes we believe in God in a very, maybe superficial way. God is there, yes, we believe. He's running the world, he's running my world. But trust is going to say to God, you know what, come, I'm going to go on your shoulders. Even through this difficulty, even as I overcome this challenge, I'm jumping on your shoulders. Let's walk this together. That's the difference between the two. So that's another level of emunah that was spoken about here in this question. Okay. I want to relate to some of the chat questions and then open this up. The first one was mourners' prayers. Why doesn't it include anything about death? That's a good question. Indeed, the mourner's prayer, which is also known as the Kaddish, doesn't include anything about death. What it does include is words like Yitgadal, which means let God's name be angredized. Yitgadal comes from the word Gadol, which means grand. Let God's name be angredized. How is that connected to death? I think it's the message of Judaism when we, unfortunately, sometimes encounter death. The message of Judaism is that instead of dying with the death that you encountered and becoming less of yourself, be more of yourself. Instead of responding to death with minimizing yourself, angredize yourself in God. Respond to death with life. Respond to darkness with light. Why? Because death comes and creates indeed a void. So are we going to sink in that void? Judaism says no. Fill that void by angredizing God's name, by making it bigger. Respond to death with life. And that, by the way, has been the Jewish reaction to death individually and collectively throughout history. Whenever we faced a tragedy, we responded with even more growth. Whether it's the destruction of the temple that then created the Talmud, or whether it's the Holocaust that somehow led to the creation of the state of Israel. Today, there are more yeshivas in Israel than there ever have been in Jewish history. That's the response to death, Yitgadal v'Yitkadash. And that's why the mourner's prayer doesn't include the word death, because it wants to impart on the mourners their duty not to respond to death with even more life.